The biggest break in California's proposed billionaire tax might be hiding in plain sight. Not a hedge fund, not a private jet, a house. Most people hear wealth tax and assume every mansion gets counted. But under this proposal, the ownership structure may matter almost as much as the property itself. At the center of this story is a Realtor.com report published on April 29, 2026. It tracks a simple but expensive distinction. California's proposed billionaire tax would impose a one-time 5% levy on certain ultra-wealthy residents tied to their net worth. According to the measure's text and California's legislative analyst, the tax targets people with more than roughly $1.1 billion who were California residents on January 1, 2026. But the measure carves out directly held real estate. It also excludes real property held in a revocable trust. That creates a striking contrast. Own the home directly, and it may stay outside the tax base. Hold it through a limited liability company, and it may not. Think of it like airport security. The suitcase matters, but so does the container it arrives in. That is why this is not just a mansion story. It is really a paperwork story with mansion-sized consequences. The Realtor report says Mark Zuckerberg's California real estate could trim about $250 million from taxable wealth if the ownership structure changed. At a 5% tax rate, that would mean roughly $12.5 million in savings. Not from selling assets, from changing how homes are held. And this matters because the proposal is not a broad property tax reset. California's legislative analyst says the one-time levy is aimed at billionaires living in California on January 1, 2026. It estimates the measure would affect a little over 200 people statewide. Real estate, pensions, and retirement accounts are listed as excluded categories, which helps explain why the fine print around title and trusts suddenly matters so much. The article describes Zuckerberg's Palo Alto compound as the center of an 11-home spread built over many years. Realtor has separately reported that Palo Alto officials recently debated a proposal aimed at buyers who assemble 3 or more homes within a 500-foot radius, an apparent response to the kind of mega compound buying associated with Zuckerberg. In the end, the city did not adopt a hard ban and instead moved toward reviewing construction, vacancy, and private security rules. That adds a second layer to the story. These properties are not just tax relevant, they are politically visible. But visibility is not the same as tax treatment. The key question is whether those homes are held directly or through entities. The article says records show several of Zuckerberg's nearby properties are registered to limited liability companies. If that remains true, they could still count toward taxable net worth. Sam Altman faces a similar issue, though on a smaller scale in dollar terms. The principle is exactly the same. The report says Altman's San Francisco holdings could reduce taxable wealth by around $125 million if ownership changed. That translates to about $6.25 million in potential tax savings under the proposal's 5% rate. And there is a concrete portfolio behind that estimate. Realtor has previously reported that Altman bought 3 adjacent San Francisco homes together for about $38.5 million, next to the Russian Hill mansion he bought for $27 million in 2020. Those 3 adjacent dwellings were reported to be registered to the same LLC, making them a useful example of how the ownership wrapper can matter as much as the underlying address. The article points to his Russian Hill mansion and 3 adjacent dwellings bought together for tens of millions of dollars. It also says those properties are currently held through a limited liability company, which could keep them inside the tax calculation. Jensen Huang enters the story as a different kind of example. He is wealthy enough for the same rule to matter, but his public posture is different. The report estimates Huang's California real estate portfolio at about $53 million. That would trim only a small fraction of his overall tax bill, around $2.7 million. Bloomberg reported in April 2026 that Huang urged people to move to California despite high taxes and billionaire exits. Realtor also quoted him describing himself as perfectly fine with whatever taxes the state chooses to apply. That separates him from billionaires whose response has centered more on relocation or defensive planning. And that broader migration matters. The tax is aimed at residency as of a specific date, not just where someone lives later. California's legislative analyst says the proposal would apply to billionaires who were California residents on January 1, 2026, if voters approve the measure. Supporters say it would raise money for public programs. Critics warn it could trigger legal fights, planning changes, and more exits by wealthy residents. Major coverage from CBS and the Los Angeles Times shows that debate is now fully public, with organizers saying they collected enough signatures to pursue a November 2026 ballot fight. The Los Angeles Times reported supporters plan to submit nearly 1.6 million signatures, about double the threshold needed. CBS said organizers are pitching the tax as a way to help prevent hospital and clinic closures and support public education and food assistance. That means this is no longer a fringe policy idea. It is a live political battle with very real planning consequences. For tax lawyers and estate planners, the important detail is not just how much someone owns. It is how title is held on the assessment date and afterward. There is one more thing to keep in mind. This loophole is narrow, and it does not make the tax disappear. Directly held real estate may be excluded, but stocks, private company stakes, and many other assets would still dominate billionaire balance sheets. So the house rule matters most as a trimming tool, not a total escape hatch. Even a huge property portfolio is often small next to tech stock. Still, when the numbers are this large, a trim can mean millions. That is why this detail has become so important. The deeper lesson is simple. Tax policy is not only about rates, it is about definitions, dates, and legal structure. And if California voters eventually approve this measure, some of the biggest fortunes in the state may hinge on a surprisingly ordinary question. Not who owns the home, but exactly how they own it.